Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. A man gave me his old family videos. After watching them, I understand why he was so desperate to get rid of them. My job is trash. I don't mean that in a metaphorical, I hate my career kind of way. I mean it literally. I'm a garbage collector. My alarm goes off at 4 a.m. I pull on steel-toe boots, and I spend the next 8 hours heaving the things people don't want anymore into the back of a growling truck. It's a dirty, smelly, physically demanding job, but it pays the bills for my tiny apartment, and it's honest work. You also learn a lot about people from what they throw away. Most of the time, it's just bags of household garbage. But sometimes you find treasures, a broken piece of furniture that can be fixed, a box of old books. People get rid of the strangest things. My rule is that if it's in a box and set out separately, it's fair game to take a look. That's how I ended up with the tapes. It happened a few weeks ago. I was on my usual route through a quiet, older suburban neighborhood. One of the residents, a man probably in his late 20s, flagged me down. He looked awful. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, with dark, bruised-looking circles under them, like he hadn't slept in a month. His hands were trembling. "Hey," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You're the garbage guy, right? Can you just take this for me? Just get it out of my house. Please." He shoved a heavy cardboard box into my hands. It was sealed with a single hasty strip of packing tape. "Sure thing, man," I said. "Just leave it on the curb next time." "No," he said, his eyes darting around nervously. "I need it gone. Now." He didn't wait for a reply. He just turned and practically ran back into his house, slamming the door behind him. I shrugged, tossed the box into the cab of my truck to look through later, and continued my route. That night, back in my apartment, I finally opened the box. It was heavy. Inside, packed neatly, were at least 50 old home video cassettes. The kind we all used in the 90s. Big, clunky black rectangles. None of them had labels. They were completely anonymous. I'm not gonna lie, my first thought was a little voyeuristic. Who knew what could be on these? Maybe something weird, something interesting. It was a window into a stranger's life. Anything was better than the usual mind-numbing cable TV. I had an old VCR/TV combo I'd picked up from a thrift store, so I pulled it out, blew the dust off it, and popped in the first tape. The screen flickered to life with a burst of static, then resolved into a shaky, oversaturated home video. It was a kid's birthday party. A backyard. A bunch of screaming children. A cake with cartoon characters on it. The timestamp in the corner said 1998. Watching it, I got a strange sense of secondhand nostalgia. The clothes, the music, the quality of the video itself. It was a time capsule, and I recognized one of the kids. A small, skinny boy with a goofy grin. It was the man who had given me the box. The next few tapes were more of the same. Christmas mornings with mountains of discarded wrapping paper. Awkward family vacations to the beach. The camera panning shakily across sunburned faces. I watched him grow up on those tapes, from a little kid to a gawky teenager. It was strangely intimate, watching these moments that were never meant for my eyes. It was all so normal, boring, even. I was about to give up and just toss the whole box. That's when I put in the tape of the barbecue. The timestamp said July 2002. The scene was familiar. A sunny backyard. Adults drinking beer. Kids running through a sprinkler. The man from the tapes, now a teenager, was trying to flip burgers on a grill, clearly failing. It was another slice of mundane life. I was half watching, half scrolling on my phone, and then the video glitched. The screen dissolved into a brief, violent snowstorm of static, a loud beezy-eaty, coming through the speakers. It lasted only a second. When the picture returned, the scene was the same. The burgers were still burning. The kids were still screaming. But something was different. In the background, hanging from the thick branches of a large oak tree, there was a shadow. It wasn't there before the glitch. I rewound the tape, watched it again. Normal scene. BZZZ. Glitch. And there it was. It was a dark, amorphous shape like a smudge on the lens, but it had a distinct, unsettling form. It looked tentacled, like a squid or an octopus made of pure darkness, just dangling there among the leaves. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart beating a little faster. It was probably nothing, a film artifact, a bit of the tape degrading in a weird way. That had to be it. I shook my head, dismissing the creepy feeling crawling up my spine, and let the tape play out. The shadow never moved. It was just there, a silent, impossible observer in a happy family memory. I put in the next tape. A Christmas morning from 2004. The family was in their living room, opening presents. The teenage boy, the man, was showing off a new video game console. It was all laughter and joy. I was watching intently now, waiting. BZZZ, the glitch, the static, the picture returned, and my blood ran cold. It was there again, the thing, but it wasn't on a tree in the background anymore. It was in the house. For a few frames, just a fraction of a second, I saw it standing in the dark hallway that led out of the living room. It was clearer this time. It had depth, a three-dimensional quality. It wasn't a flat shadow. It was a thing, a tall, spindly, dark thing with what looked like long, thin limbs that coiled and shifted like they had no bones. It was just standing there, in the shadows of the hallway, watching the family celebrate. I rewound it, played it in slow motion. Before the glitch, the hallway was empty. After the glitch, the creature was there. It wasn't part of the original recording. The glitch wasn't revealing something that was already there. The glitch was adding it. It was inserting this observer into the memory. That's when the obsession began. I spent the next 3 days doing nothing but watching those tapes. I called in sick to work. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I sat in my darkened apartment, the only light coming from the glowing screen of the old TV, and I watched. Every single tape was the same. A normal family event, a wedding, a graduation, a trip to a theme park. And in every single one, the glitch would happen. And every single time, the thing would be there, and it was getting closer. On a tape of a trip to the zoo, it was a dark shape behind the glass of the reptile house. On a tape of a school play, it was a tall, thin figure standing in the wings of the stage. With each appearance, it became more defined. The vague, octopus-like shadow resolved into a distinct silhouette. The silhouette grew limbs, a torso, a head. It was impossibly tall and thin, its limbs too long, its joints bending at unnatural angles. It was like a spider and a man had been melted together in the dark. It never moved. It never interacted with the family. It just watched, a silent, parasitic passenger on their memories. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I just seeing things? Was the man who gave me the tape some kind of weird indie filmmaker who made found footage horror? But it all felt too real. The family, their lives, it was authentic. The creature was the only thing that felt wrong. I got to the last tape in the box. It was older than the others, the quality much worse. The timestamp read 1995. The tape began in a sterile white hospital room. A tired-looking woman in a hospital bed. A man who I recognized as a younger version of father from the other tapes, holding a small, swaddled bundle. It was the birth of the man who had given me the box. His first moment of life, captured on grainy magnetic tape. I braced myself. I stared at the screen, my knuckles white, waiting for the inevitable glitch, waiting to see where the creature would appear this time. In the corner of the room, in the reflection of a window. But the tape played on. The baby cried. The mother smiled, exhausted but happy. The father cooed. The camera zoomed in on the baby's tiny, wrinkled face. It played perfectly from start to finish. No glitches, no static, no creature, The tape ended, the screen dissolving into a blank, blue void. A wave of immense, shuddering relief washed over me. I laughed, a choked, hysterical sound. It was over. The last tape was clean. It was just a weird, recurring flaw in the other tapes. A magnetic anomaly. My brain had filled in the blanks. Created a monster out of nothing. I was an idiot. A sleep-deprived, paranoid idiot. I leaned forward and turned off the VCR. The TV screen went black, and I saw it. It wasn't in a reflection. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was in the room with me, the darkness behind the television. In the corner where the shadows were deepest was wrong. It was a patch of absolute black, a void that seemed to drink the faint light from the street lamp outside. And from that void, 2 points of light ignited. 2 giant, crimson, self-luminous eyes. They weren't looking at the TV. They were looking at me. I could see its shape now, fully formed, no longer a grainy image on a screen. It was pressed against the wall and the ceiling. Its long, spindly limbs splayed out like a monstrous spider. Its body was a shifting mass of shadows. But those eyes were solid and real and filled with an ancient, terrifying intelligence. I don't think I screamed. I think the sound was trapped in my throat, a solid ball of pure terror. I scrambled backward, falling out of my chair, and crab walked across the floor until my back hit the opposite wall. I fumbled for the lamp on my end table, my fingers feeling like useless, clumsy sausages. I found the switch and flicked it. The room was flooded with light. The corner was empty. The TV was just a TV. The shadows were just shadows. It was gone, but it had been there. I knew it. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my lit kitchen, clutching a butcher knife, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. Sleep was a country I could no longer visit. The next morning, driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to go back to the man's house. I had to know. I had to ask him what he'd put me through. I gathered up the tapes, put them back in their box, and drove over to his neighborhood. When I pulled onto the street, I saw the police cars. Yellow tape was cordoning off his house. My heart sank into my stomach. I parked down the street and walked closer, trying to look like a curious neighbor. A small group of actual neighbors were gathered on the sidewalk, speaking in hushed, morbid tones. Just found him this morning. An elderly woman was saying, "Terrible, so young. What happened?" Another neighbor asked. The woman lowered her voice, but I was close enough to hear. They're not saying much, but my cousin's son is one of the officers on scene. He said it was the strangest thing he's ever seen. The man was just sitting in his chair, no signs of a struggle, but his head, well, the top of his skull was gone, and his brain, it was missing. I didn't hear anything else. The words hit me like a physical blow. His brain was missing. The world tilted on its axis. I turned and stumbled back to my car, the box of tapes feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I got home, my mind a blank roar of static. I needed to get rid of them, burn them, throw them in a river. I brought the box inside, and as I was about to just dump the contents into a trash bag, my fingers brushed against a piece of paper at the very bottom, hidden beneath the last cassette. I hadn't noticed it before. It was a small, folded note. The handwriting was shaky, erratic, the writing of a man on the edge of utter collapse. I unfolded it. It only had a few words. "I am sorry." It promised me it would leave me alone. And in that moment, I understood everything. He passed it to me. And now I don't know what to do. Do I live with this thing, this silent observer, waiting for it to get hungry? Or do I find another person, another stranger, and hand them a box of old tapes? Do I save myself by damning someone else, just like he did? But it hadn't saved him. The creature had lied. It had moved on to me, and then it had gone back to collect its final payment from him. His brain. Maybe that's what it eats. Minds. I don't know. All I know is that I'm so tired, but I'm terrified to go to sleep. Story 2. I thought the warnings were small-town superstition. In our small desert town, every teacher warns the kids, never go into the fields. We hear it starting in first grade. No explanation. Just don't. When I started middle school, my mom enrolled me in a charter school, hoping I'd stop hearing about it. She thought it was some creepy small-town tradition. But in 7th grade, the warnings got more specific. Even the charter teachers told us, if you see black tarps on or near the bushes, stay away. Never go into the field. By the time freshman year rolled around, I told my mom the warnings had stopped. It was a lie. She grew up in the city, 70 miles from any kind of field. I never told her why the kids around here actually stayed away. My freshman history teacher once told us the human brain doesn't fully mature until around 25. That's why young people make impulsive decisions. Then he said something that stuck. Our town has a lower mortality rate for young adults than the rest of the region. It's not by much, but it's there, especially for the younger ones. I figured he was full of it, just another weird desert superstition. One afternoon, I had to pick up my little sister from school. My mom had gotten herself into some trouble again, and I was used to filling in cooking, homework, bedtime. I was more of a parent than she was. The sky was angry that day. Black clouds, flashes on the horizon. The middle school was just across the street from the high school, so I walked over and signed my sister out. My history teacher was in the front office. He offered us a ride home. I thanked him, but said we lived just around the corner. As we were leaving, he said, "Don't go through the field. They've spotted black tarps today." I waved him off. It started sprinkling. I looked down the road, saw a group of local skinheads hanging out near the corner, watching us. I didn't want to scare my sister, so I lied. "We'll cut through the field." I told her, "It's faster." She froze. Her face went pale. I told her she could hold my hand the whole time. I even told her Mom was making her favorite stew for dinner. Another lie. Mom hadn't cooked for us in 6 months. Reluctantly, she nodded. We stepped into the field just as thunder cracked. She jumped. I started singing her favorite song to calm her down. The rain picked up and lightning flashed across the sky. That's when she let go of my hand and took off running toward home. She was fast. I shouted and chased after her, but I slipped on the wet dirt and hit the ground hard. I looked up just in time to see her stop and glance back at me. Then she was gone. Not ran off gone, just gone. I panicked. I thought maybe she'd sprinted the rest of the way home. I ran harder than I ever had. My lungs burned. My legs shook. When I saw our house in the distance, I almost cried with relief. The front door was open. I could hear the TV on, the afternoon news. I slipped my shoes off at the door and hugged my mom as she walked out of the kitchen. She hugged me back, smiling like nothing was wrong. Then she said, "Baby, where's your little sister?" Story 3. He's getting closer. And the lease isn't up for 3 more weeks. It's been almost a year since we moved into this house, and our lease is finally up in August. It's July now, and we're already counting down the days like inmates etching marks into concrete. 1 more month. Just 1 more month. We're not well off. 1 vehicle. 3 daughters. Both of us work full-time in retirement communities. Steady work. Decent pay. No fancy degrees required. Just certifications and annual trainings. It's honest work. Hard work. You see things in those places. Things that make you question how alone we ever really are. I wouldn't say I believe in ghosts. Not like the ones on TV. But I believe some things linger. Energy. Grief. Regret. Call it what you want. Whatever this house has, it's not just energy. And it's not just lingering. This is the first time I felt the kind of dread that makes me pull all 3 of my kids into bed with me, turn the lights on, and stay up listening. Not for burglars. Not for storms. But for the quiet. Let me back up. Last summer, we had a shot to leave the trailer park. We were paying too much for too little. Duct tape windows, barbed wire fencing keep the dog in, tarps nailed over the roof to stop leaks during monsoon. Then we saw this place, actual drywall, fenced-in yard, walking distance from a good school, and only a couple hundred more than what we were already struggling to make work. A house with a garage, a mounted microwave, central AC. The switch from a swamp cooler to central AC in the southern Arizona summer was bliss. Every detail felt like winning the lottery. I cried the first night we moved in. The kids were so excited, running around, picking rooms, amazed by little things like closet doors that actually closed. I told them this was a fresh start, something better, a step up. That first week was a blur of moving boxes and adjusting. Then one night my youngest, she was 8 then, came into our room pale as a sheet. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just stood by the bed and said, "The red man was watching me." Now, I'm a mom. I've got 3 kids. I know nightmares. I know growing pains and too scary cartoons. I chalked it up to the new house, making weird shadows. The house is just settling. I told her, old pipes, new creaks. You'll get used to it. She curled up next to me and didn't argue. I didn't think about it again until 3 nights later, when our middle daughter came out of her room crying. She wet the bed, said she was too scared to move. What scared you? I asked. She shook her head. I don't want to say it. It hears when we talk about it. At this point, I still thought it was just kid stuff. Transition stress. Maybe the younger one said something, and the middle one latched onto it. Still, I made a note to keep their bedroom door open at night. But that same week, I heard it. It was nearly midnight. My partner and I were watching a movie on the couch. We paused it, no idea why. Just that shared look between people who both sensed something's off. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Walking above us. There is no second story in this house. Just the attic. We looked at each other, both waiting for the other to say it first. Maybe it's an animal? I whispered, but we both knew it wasn't. It was steps. Deliberate. Human. He checked on the girls. All asleep. Nothing disturbed. We tried to sleep after that, but it didn't feel like the house was ours anymore. Not really. In the months that followed, it was little things. Lights flickering. Garage doors slamming, even when latched. The hallway mirror cracked from the inside somehow. Our dog, a sweet, gentle mutt, stopped going near the laundry room completely. That's where the attic access is. She trembles when we open that door. Once, I tried coaxing her in with a treat. She pissed herself and bolted. And always, it starts with the silence. You don't notice how loud the world is until it stops. The fridge hum, the fan, the wind, even the cars from the main road. Gone. Like someone pressed mute on reality. And then the smell. Metallic. Burned. Like pennies roasted in the sun. It hits you all at once and settles in the back of your throat. The smell always follows the silence. 2 weeks ago, I caught something in the hallway vent above the girl's door. Just movement. A flicker. We keep the lights on at night now. But those old vents are like slatted plastic windows between rooms. They shouldn't show anything, not upward. But I saw something cross over it. Like something was on the ceiling. On the wrong side. Last night was the worst. The girls had all come into our room on their own, without being asked. No screaming. Just quietly standing there like they decided something was safer with us. I let them pile into bed, pulled the blankets over, turned the fan on low. I stayed up listening. Then the silence hit. The fan stopped. The streetlight outside flickered and went black. And the smell rolled in. All 4 girls were breathing fast, pretending to sleep. I knew it. I could feel it. Then my youngest whispered, so soft I almost can hear it. He's in the vent again. I didn't sleep after that. None of us did. There's only a few weeks left on this lease. We can't afford to break it early. And even if we could, I don't know that it would matter. I don't know if this thing is tied to the house, or if it's noticed us. I'm not sure how to protect my kids from something I can't see, can't fight, can barely explain. But every night now, I sit in bed with them. Lights on, fan running, and I wait for the silence, because that's when I know he's listening. Story 4. I used to have an imaginary friend when I was 6. Now it's back. In the early 2000s, I had an imaginary friend named E.D. I thought I was the only one who could see him. Of course. My parents assumed it was just a phase and didn't think much of it. Ed. And I used to hang out mostly in my room or up in the treehouse. He was a tall, slender man with a thin, unsettling smile and extremely pale skin. Every year on my birthday, I'd find an extra present waiting in my room. No one ever saw who left it. Each time it was a small bone. After my 10th birthday, E.D. disappeared, and the present stopped too. It's been 10 years now. Today is my 20th birthday. I live alone in a small apartment about 15 minutes from my childhood home. I spend the day with my family. They took me out for a nice dinner. We laughed, we hugged, and then we parted ways. I headed home, looking forward to a quiet night. When I arrived, I noticed the front door was unlocked. I paused. Maybe I forgot to lock it? I stepped inside, flipped on the lights, and rounded the corner. That's when I saw it. A small box with a bow and a card. I froze. Is this some kind of prank? I muttered, trying to laugh it off. But the laugh didn't come. I opened the card. Happy 20th birthday. I missed you, Ed. My heart dropped. I stared down at the box. It looked just like the one from childhood. Simple, wrapped with a red bow. I hesitated, then carefully opened it. Inside was a freshly amputated human finger. I gasped and dropped the box. It hit the floor with a sickening thud. That's when I noticed the blood. A thin trail of it led to the closet near the door. The knob creaked as it slowly began to turn on its own. Then the door opened with a blood-curdling groan. And there he was, Ed. He was older now, but still tall and deathly pale. His face had the same thin smile, but his eyes were wild, manic. He wore a tattered, stained outfit that looked like it belonged in a long-abandoned asylum. His left hand, it had no fingers. Fresh wounds at the nubs. I won't let them separate us again, he screamed, charging at me. He tackled me to the floor and tried to jam his bloody, fingerless hand into my mouth. I screamed as I felt my teeth shatter under pressure. More blood poured from his mutilated stump as the skin tore against my broken teeth. I flailed, blindly reaching for anything. My hand closed around something cold and metal. The knife, the same one he must have used to cut off his finger. I stabbed him, hard, into the side of the neck. Blood erupted, spraying across the room like a fire hose, painting the walls and carpet in deep, violent reds. But he didn't stop. His body thrashed violently, using every last ounce of strength to choke the life out of me. My vision blurred. My lungs burned. The warmth of his blood poured down my throat. Just as I was about to surrender to the inviting pull of unconsciousness, he fell off me. I coughed up blood in shards of my own teeth. My hands trembled. My entire body was in shock. I passed out. When I woke up in the hospital, they told me I'd developed aspiration pneumonia from inhaling so much blood. I'd also need extensive dental reconstruction. But I was alive. I let out a shaky breath and turned my head to the side, grateful to have survived. That's when I saw it. On the table beside my hospital bed, a small gift box with a card labeled from E.D. Story 5. My father got sent one final delivery. I wish I never opened it. A truck pulled into my driveway. It was run down, rusted, and squealed as it grinded to a halt outside my home. I watched through my window in interest as a thin whip of a man and his pudgy little sidekick opened the back of the truck. The steel on steel created a sharp screech that pierced my ears and made me wince. The two men climbed into the back of the truck. I heard them yelling orders at each other from the interior, seeming more hurried than aggressive. No, quickly, over there. You gotta tie that one down, it's fragile. My house is the only on the street that isn't abandoned. So I knew whatever was in there was for me, or perhaps an order for my late father he placed before he passed. Either way, I waited in nervous anticipation for whatever the hell these two men were pulling from their truck. Finally, after a grueling 10 minutes, the men re-emerged. The short fellow dropped to the road first, landing not so gracefully on the heels of his work boots and nearly toppling forward. The lanky man came out more gracefully. He had a trolley stacked with 5 boxes that he carefully and slowly rolled out. Even with his grace, the wheels clattered to the paved road. "Fucking hell, Topher, be careful," the short one bellowed. As they began toward my house, I decided to meet them halfway up my driveway. "Hello, ma'am. My name is Topher, and this lovely chap is my partner Humphrey." He spoke with a certain elegance, like he was trying to serve me at a fancier restaurant and upcharge me for the Wagyu. "We got your packages, straight from Whiskfield Labs, kept private and confidential as you requested." I looked down at the boxes. Each was labeled, "DR Kensong's Eyes Only." My father's name. I raised my hands. "I can't accept these, sorry, you'll have to take them back." The two gentlemen looked at each other before looking back at me. Humphrey removed his cap and scratched his balding head. "But miss, we were told to take it right here, no exceptions today." He looked nervous, and before I had a chance to speak, he quickly added, "See, can't we just leave them here?" Topher slapped the back of Humphrey's head, causing him to stumble forward a bit. "It's no problem. We'll make a call and get this sorted. May we remain parked over yonder while we take the call?" I nodded. He tipped his hat, and they brought the boxes back to the truck, but didn't reload them. Topher drew an old flip phone from his pocket and immediately began dialing. I was never permitted to accept my father's packages. He always demanded I send them away until he got home. He worked for the government, a head scientist in a research division revolving around some medical field. I never was told the details. I wasn't allowed to know. I only ever caught glimpses of what he brought home. Chrome tools that looked like futuristic chainsaws, welding irons, and other very non-medical equipment. Whenever he slipped up and I saw, he would loudly and aggressively demand I keep my mouth shut about it, even slapping me on a couple occasions to keep me in line, though I never dared slip out of it. He would tell me if he ever died, I wasn't allowed in his study. I was to keep sending packages away, and I would never sell the home. "Just let it rot," he would say. "Nobody is allowed to see." Last month, he died in an accident at work. All I was told is it involved a heavy vacuum seal location and a pressure change. Googling those words, I found out about the Byford Dolphin accident, and that's all I needed to know. This was the first package that arrived since his death, and even after he was gone, I dare not go against his words. After a few more minutes, I went back inside and began making myself coffee. Dad's lock study felt darker than usual, like there was some kind of thing living behind it, a test subject for my father's experiments or a creature from another world, waiting for the doors to slide open and let it out. Though deep down I knew it was just strange tools and paperwork stamped with government seals, though whatever was written on those documents would probably be just as scary as a strange beast. My phone began to buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a private number. Slowly I pulled it to my face. "Hello, Kim speaking." "Afternoon, Kim." My dad's voice spoke. I immediately dropped my mobile to the floor, and it landed with a clatter, skidding under a cupboard. I knew it was him. He only ever called from private lines, and I had been mourning his tone of voice since I learned he died. After the shock wore off, I quickly skid across the floor on my knees and fetched the phone. The call's still running. "Dad? Dad, is that? How? What?" Tears streamed down my cheeks and pooled at my knees. "Are you done?" He responded bluntly. "It doesn't matter how I'm calling, but I am. Bring the boxes inside. Leave them in my study, but don't linger. Goodbye, Kim." Then nothing as the call ended. I stared down at my phone. The now blank screen stared back. My father gone again as quick as he returned. I dragged myself to my feet and looked towards the front door. I slowly shuffled over, snot pouring from my nose that I fruitlessly cleaned with my sleeve. As I cracked the seal to the outside world, the two men were already waiting, the boxes right in my face. "We know where to go, ma'am. Ken informed us." Topher said softly, "I'm sorry for your loss." My heart thundered in my chest. None of this made sense. How were they informed? How did my dad call? Being in total shock, I stepped out of the way and watched them enter my home, without a word. As I got close to the study, I realized I didn't have a key, and neither did I. "Gee, guys, those are locked." I squeaked out. Humphrey turned and smiled at me. withdrawing a small silver key from his pocket. "Not a problem, miss." As the key slid into the lock, I winced and my cheeks stung, as if they were just struck. The two men pushed the boxes into the study, vanishing into the inky blackness of the forbidden space. After a small argument between the two, they exited, tipping their heads towards me. "Everything will get better soon, ma'am," Topher kindly offered. "I promise." The two men waved me goodbye and left my house. I turned back towards the study, and the doors were left open, the darkness lashing out like tendrils, luring me in. I walked up and grabbed the two doors, ready to yank them shut, but I couldn't help and quickly scan the space. As expected, it was mostly just paperwork on desks, filing cabinets, and books lining shelves. Strangely, none of the chrome tools were to be seen, potentially already removed. As my intrigue took hold, I stepped forward. My foot collided with a trash can. It rolled and bumped the side of the box stack. The highest box must have been heaviest, as the entire tower came crashing down. They all landed with a sickening wet thud and slid along the floor. Instinctively, I reached down and stacked them back up, but as I grabbed a smaller box, the flaps peeled open, and a red shape fell out, plopping to the floor, leaving a small brown stain. A human heart. I watched in horror as the organ began to writhe and beat, spurting translucent red tinged blood over the ground. I turned away and ran to the bathroom, cramming my head into the toilet and vomiting a thick stream of acidic bile into the water. As I lurched out the remainder of my lunch, I yanked my phone from my pocket and began to dial 911. I stared in horror, watching toward the bathroom door frame, expecting something or someone to walk in to stop me. When I finally connected, I explained that two men who worked for my dad dropped off boxes of harvested organs. I screamed into the phone, begging for help. The lady on the other end was confused but trying to help. "Just stay on the line and try to breathe." I went to respond and ask how long the cops would be, but something awful yanked me from my panic. My dad's voice echoed through the house. "You shouldn't have done that." I rose to my feet, my phone sliding from my grasp and cracking on tiles. "Dad?" I called out, to no response. I slowly made my way through my house, the shadows of the setting sun causing everything to feel foggy and the hallways longer. "Dad? Dad, was that you?" Once again, nobody called back. I turned the final corner, and the forbidden room came into view. The boxes had been opened. I saw body parts and organs strewn about, fingers, a shredded arm, an eyeball. As I got closer, I locked eyes with him, my father piecing himself back together. Story 6. There's something in my shower. I shower a lot. Or, at least I used to. My city gets pretty humid, and I live in a crappy apartment with no air conditioning. Add those two things together, and you get a lot of cold showers. A guy's got to keep cool somehow, right? In the middle of June, I took a trip back to my hometown to visit family. It was nice to see everyone. Plus, my parents have a great HVAC system. All in all, I was dreading coming back to the city, but I had no clue that what was waiting for me was so much worse than just a scorching apartment. I arrived back in my city in the evening. Stepping through my front door, I was greeted by stifling heat. Immediately, I felt sweat starting to bead on my forehead, and my mind went straight to the shower. Without even stopping to turn on the lights, I set my bags down and made my way down the hallway. At the end of the hall, I entered the small room on my right, the bathroom. I got in the shower as fast as I could and turned on the water. I heard a rattling sound, and the water began to sputter out of the shower head before reaching a steady stream. I didn't think much of this at the time, just chalked it up to the fact I'd been gone for the week. Maybe the water pressure had to equalize or something. I'm not a plumber. I was too busy enjoying the cool water to think about that anyways. I'd been in there for a few minutes when I felt it. Something wet touched my leg. I know. I'm in a shower, everything's wet. This was different. This was something solid. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but I felt it all the same. I spun around, turning toward the shower head and drain. Nothing there. I shrugged it off as best I could insisting to myself that it must have been my imagination. The next morning, I went to take my pre-work shower, having mostly forgotten about the little incident from the day before, but I felt it again. This time, there was no denying it. Something would have touched my leg more confidently than before. The texture of the thing was familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I forced myself to go to work, but found that I was completely unable to focus. That afternoon, I once again arrived home to an unbearably hot apartment, slick with sweat. This damn heat wave. Despite my hesitancy, which was quickly turned to fear, I knew I had to shower. So I came up with a plan. I would shower facing the drain, rather than turning my back to it like usual. Confident I'd be able to identify whatever was causing my problem, I stepped in the shower. But my plan didn't work. I was an idiot. I got shampoo in my eye. Instinctively, I shut my eyes and felt that familiar sensation on my leg. What's worse, I realized what the texture reminded me of. It felt like a fucking tongue. I decided that I'd had enough. I phoned my landlord, who, after a great deal of persistence on my end, agreed to come check the shower drain the next morning. That night was a sleepless one for me. I must have looked like shit, because when he got there the next morning, my landlord, who typically doesn't seem to give a damn about his tenants, asked if everything was all right. I said it was fine, just that the drain was acting funny, and that he needed to fix it. I'll be the first to admit, I was kind of being an asshole about it. But can you blame me? About 15 minutes later, he came out of my bathroom and told me everything was fine, that there didn't seem to be anything abnormal with the drain at all. I just stared at him. Obviously, everything wasn't fine, but what am I going to tell him? That something in the drain keeps licking my leg? Still, I didn't say anything, and my lack of appreciation must have pissed him off, because he left without saying a word. I was late for work by this point, but I didn't care. I left my phone in the kitchen and went to the bathroom. I got on my knees in the shower and just stared down the drain. I don't know what I expected to happen, but I need answers. And in the end, I got them. I'd been staring down the drain for maybe 10 minutes when I saw it. It started as a dim yellow slit running horizontal through the dark circle of the drain. The slit expanded until it became a full, familiar circle. A fucking eyeball. A big one, too. It almost looked human, but was just too damn big. It quivered slightly as we made eye contact, almost like it was excited. I scrambled out of the bathtub and slammed the bathroom door behind me. I refused to set foot in that room, or even open the door after that. For days, I didn't shower. Co-workers began to give me dirty looks and cringe when I approached them, but it didn't matter to me. There was no way I was going back in the bathroom. I snapped on the 6th day. That morning, I emerged from my putrid bedroom after another near sleepless night. I don't know what it was, but something in me told me to look down the hallway toward the bathroom. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. The bathroom door was wide open. I don't remember much of that day after that. I remember the intense, primal fear that drove me out of the house and to my car. I remember entering my apartment with a jerry can. I remember lighting the match. And I remember the sound of screeching tires as I drove to the last place I had felt safe. I arrived at my parents' house a little after dinner time. They were surprised to see me, and more surprised at how rough I looked. I had barely slept over the last week, was hyperventilating, and probably smelled like garbage that had been left out in the sun. My mom encouraged me to take deep breaths and try to relax. After that, we could talk about what had happened and why I was back. A nice warm shower would do the trick, she told me. My mom wouldn't take no for an answer, and it probably wasn't an option to decline anyway, given how I smelled. And honestly, the shower worked wonders. I felt the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders as I washed off a week's worth of filth and grime from my body. Then I felt something warm and wet wrap around my leg. Story 7. The Girl in the Lake. I was 14 when I went to camp. It was a simple getaway off in the woods, north of where I lived. It was quiet up there. There's a certain kind of calm you get when you're just deep enough into the wilderness. It can be so isolating. You feel like you're in the middle of nowhere and the rest of the world is a whole planet away, even if it's only a quick 15-minute drive back to civilization. My guess as to why we were there was to learn about nature, pick up some camping skills, and not trouble our parents for a while. For me, it was a chance to meet some new friends. For a bit of background, growing up I was a kid with a fair share of problems. I was always a tad socially inept, and I lacked that kind of confidence every child should have. I didn't have many friends, and I spent most of my time in my room on the computer or reading books. Maybe that's why my parents sent me off to summer camp. Things weren't always the best at home. I cried back then. I cried a lot, even at little things. Things that scared me, things that upset me. I was always unpopular amongst my peers. Not hated nor bullied by any means, but more so, ignored. That's who I was. At camp, though, it was a fresh start, and no one knew me before I arrived. Perhaps that's why I was able to make two good friends. Their names were Jack and Amy. I met Jack first. He was my age. In fact, we were born in the same month of the same year. But we couldn't have been more different. Jack was on the short side and had a wiry build. He wore the standard issue neon shorts and t-shirt, and always had a couple mystery bruises on him. He had a wide smile that never seemed to fade, and was always ready to take on the nearest challenge. He was a good kid. Amy was more reserved in comparison. It was Jack who introduced her to me. They were childhood friends and came here together. I don't remember exactly what she looked like, but I remember how I felt when I saw her. I had a crush on Amy. I couldn't even tell you why. I thought she was pretty and she was nice to me. I think that's all it took back then. She was always the type to reassure you and hear you out no matter what you might be dealing with. She was a kind person. Far too kind. They both were. Maybe that's why they put up with me. They treated me like we had known each other our entire lives. To the others, we must have seemed inseparable. And so, that was my life at the camp. We did a lot of things out there. Hiked up and down the trails. Went to the fire pit and shared campfire stories. Got stung when I accidentally stepped on a hornet's nest. And then, there was the lake. Only a short walk away from the campgrounds. A small lake, I'm sure, but from the shore you couldn't see the ends of it as it curved out of view. It was a place for the kids to come and tire themselves out. The other kids were always excited to go, but I always dreaded it a little. You see, I was a pretty overweight kid growing up. I'm still on the heavier side. But back then I didn't even feel that comfortable taking off my shirt around others. I remember privately asking a counselor if it'd be okay if I kept my shirt on, and them telling me to be okay and to not worry about it. In spite of all this, I was actually a great swimmer. I think I did swimming because at my size, doing much running around just beats your body up after a while. Still, I always felt a bit out of place next to Jack. He also played a sport. I think it was soccer or maybe track. Next to each other, we must have looked like David and Goliath. Not only was I heavier than Jack, I was a good few inches taller than him too. He'd always make jokes about how strong I must have been. I think he said that just to make me feel better. But back to the lake. We'd go out there almost every day during camp. Late in the afternoon, when it had cooled down a bit, the counselors would walk us all out there and let us play and fool around for an hour or so. We were told to not go out too far, so they could keep an eye on us, but they were pretty lax about it. The lake was always calm, and there were no rushing currents nor wildlife to worry about. They must have had a good amount of trust in us. I wonder if they still let kids out on that lake now. It was the second to last day of camp that it happened. Like so many days before we were out there on the lake. And it was me, Jack, and Amy. I don't know why I did it. No, I do. I was with Jack and Amy, and I had an idea. The day was winding down to an end. The sun was almost setting, and with the orange blur of the sky overhead, I turned and shot Jack challenge. Why don't we see who can swim out as far as possible underwater? We can find out who can get farther, and Amy can stay back and judge who wins. It was a childish thing to do. It was a game I knew I would win, and that Jack wouldn't turn down. I could hold my breath for a good 2 minutes, and was obviously the better swimmer, but Jack didn't care. He thought it sounded fun, and probably just wanted to see how far he could go. In hindsight, I think what he really wanted was to see how far I could go. He was that kind of friend. With that and an enthusiastic nod from Jack, We both dove under the water and prepared to launch ourselves off the soft sill to the lake bed. As I plunged into the world below me, I hesitated when I saw what was waiting down there. None of us swim goggles or anything of the like, and I wasn't used to open my eyes directly in water. So it was the first time I had actually seen the bottom of the lake. It was vast, eerily still, and so much deeper than I ever imagined. Near the shore where we were, the lake was no more than 5 or 6 feet deep, but where the sandy floor dropped off, it appeared to be at least double in depth. Its true depth was impossible to tell because of 2 things. For one, a sickening green smog of algae and mud clouded the water like a heavy morning fog. Secondly, the bottom of the lake was totally obscured by a graveyard of immense fallen trees. It was as if the forest around the lake had continued to grow right where water was, and then been knocked down by some unstoppable force. The trees were no smaller than those that were still standing. Each log was tens of feet in length, like the broken wooden bones of a great dead beast. My temporary shock was erased as I saw Jack in the corner of my eye already gliding through the water, driving himself ahead of me. I shook the feeling of uneasiness and pushed off the pillowy sand and into the open water. I knew how to swim underwater. In fact, you may not know this, but if you know how, you are often much faster under the water than on the surface. I extended my arms in front of me and stacked my hands to form a streamlined arrow. Vigorously undulating my body with a steady rhythm, I propelled myself trying to keep as tight and narrow a position as possible. As a result, my head was firmly stuck facing down, facing the lake bed, totally oblivious to my surroundings. I could only watch as the ground smoothly drifted down my vision. I thrashed forward, eager to close the distance with Jack. However, I quickly realized how foolish I was being. This wasn't a race. It didn't matter who came up first, only who got farther. I slowed myself down and tried to be more careful to conserve my energy. As I did, my mind became more at ease, and I was able to begin to appreciate the sight which at first frightened me. It was so quiet down there. To my surprise, I didn't see any movement. There wasn't a fish or bug or even a weed in sight, and aside from the logs and broken twigs, I couldn't find a single sign of life. It was an almost serene kind of solitude. As my thoughts were given time to wander, I began to forget about the race or Jack, and it was just me, alone, swimming along the bottom of a lake. Time flies by when you're in that state. I'm not sure if it's the same with running or biking, but when you swim and you hear nothing except the churning of water and your own beating heart, you are only left to think. No distractions, not even anything interesting to look at most of the time. After a while of focusing on maintaining an easy, steady pace, I eventually had the thought that quite some time had passed. I was so lost in my own world, I hadn't realized how far from the shore I had gone. I loosened my body and let my head gently rise as I took a glance at my surroundings. I was far, the corpse of the forest. I saw at a distance. I was now in the belly of, in all directions, I could only see that musty green haze and festering logs. I couldn't even see the other kids back at shore. My initial reaction was a sense of accomplishment at the distance I had crossed. I also noticed that I oriented myself at the bottom of the lake. As it dropped down, I followed it. As a result, I was far below the surface, much deeper than any pool would allow, and I had ever gone. This feat surprised even myself. But then I began to worry. I believed that I might have gone so far that Amy wouldn't be able to see me when I did eventually surface. Then, there would be no proof that I had beaten Jack at all. Jack! That's right. I should try to find Jack. I looked around in all directions and only saw more of the same. I was alone. For some reason, that thought was no longer so comforting. As I glanced around, everything seemed so foreign. It was as if I had unknowingly slipped into some other world on my trip across the lake. I needed to get there soon, I thought to myself. I bet Jack had surfaced a long time ago, and that's why I couldn't find him. I should go back. I sank to the bottom of the lake and placed my feet against one of the logs, ready to push myself back to the air. I reminded myself to be sure to wave my hands and yell when I reached the top, so Amy could find me, even if it was far away. It was then, right as I was going to tilt my head back to the world above and leave that cold, dark place, I saw her. She was no more than a few yards away from me. I had looked all around myself only a few seconds before, and yet I had somehow missed her. She looked a few years older than me and was completely naked. She had pale white skin which was tainted by the brown-green hues of the environment around her, long jet black hair that fanned out in the water like some kind of net partially obscured her face, but I could barely make out a blank expression looking back at me with focused intent. I froze in place. I didn't move a single muscle. I was so surprised by the sudden presence. I could hardly react at all. At first, I almost wanted to shut my eyes and look away out of respect for her nude appearance, but the sheer absurdity of the situation prevented me from doing so. Next, I blinked my eyes to be sure what I was seeing. She was still there, looking right back at me. A million questions raced in my mind, but the water that enveloped me blocked my ability to vocalize a single one of them. All I could do was sit there and gawk in utter confusion. I started to move my hands as if to communicate a thought, but I realized nothing I wanted to say could be conveyed in such a primitive manner. That's when she slowly drifted towards me, brushing her hair to the side, and I saw her face more clearly for the first time. That dead expression I had seen only an instant ago was gone, and instead, I saw an elegant girl with a curious stare looking back at me. She smiled at me and seemed to giggle with a whimsical playfulness, and then reached out her hand, beckoning me to take it. As she did, she pulled closer with an unnatural level of grace. It was as if she wasn't swimming at all, but instead floating through the water, commanding her body to move by some invisible force. I looked her up and down, only now taking the full extent of her beauty. I had never seen anything like her. Something about her overshadowed any incredible sight my eyes had ever had the fortune of setting themselves upon. To my young mind, it must have melted all logic or reason that remained. I must have believed that I was having one of those experiences that people at church or on TV would talk about, how God would appear before them or an angel would descend to bestow them with a wonder words cannot describe. I hesitated still, but some part of myself I had not previously known made me reach out and take a hold of her hand. In a swift, gentle motion, she pulled me in closer. I was dragged so much closer than I had ever been to a girl my age, and she took my face and put it in her hands. Her face was now inches away from mine, and it was like she was seeing into my very soul, but the way she looked at me made all the tension in my body leave me. As she looked at me, I saw her lips open and she spoke clearly in a soft, soothing voice, 3 short words. I love you. I was so taken by the statement that I did not even bother to question how she was able to speak like that underwater. Tears began to uselessly well up in my eyes. That phrase was something I never heard enough. I lowered my head as she lovingly pulled me into a hug, pressing my face against her chest. I held on to her tight, softly, sobbing, and reaching my arms around her. I struggled to process the emotions that washed over me, but in that instant, I learned a warmth I have not experienced since. Time seemed to come to pause as I let her take a hold of me. Then, I felt something with my hand. It was something round, rough and taut. Still enamored by the girl I was embracing, I slowly wrapped my hand around the object without thinking. It was cylindrical and covered in a film of slime, like the body of an eel. I traced my fingers around it in an attempt to find its origin. It was coming out of her back. I opened my eyes in a stunned daze and pulled my head around her body to see what was behind her. I saw a long black stalk, like some kind of gargantuan vine, growing straight out of her and ending somewhere in the ground away from us where I could not clearly see. It was almost like the rod of some kind of bizarre organic fishing rod. I glanced up the face of the girl I was still holding on to and saw a pair of cold, black, hateful eyes staring back at me. I yanked myself away without a second thought. I knew in that instant that whatever I had just given myself to was decidedly not human, and I did not wish to remain a second longer down here with it. I didn't even look back as I began flailing every limb on my body, desperately clawing my way back to return to the air I had since abandoned. Reaching the surface seemed like an eternity, even though it could only have been a few seconds. I refused to look anywhere but up as I rose, but I could imagine the horrid sight of something following me as I went, its arms reaching out for me, ready to grab my ankle and yank me back to the deepest parts of the lake. My lungs burned as I finally broke the surface of the lake. I gasped and tried to cry out for help, desperate to make any audible sound as loudly as I could. In my haste, I attempted to draw an air too early and choked instead, only managing to make a feeble croak. I swiveled my head around, attempting to get my bearings. I only saw the trees of the forest, and everything looked terrifyingly unfamiliar from my position. Tears and snot were streaming from my face as I began to cry when I saw the tiny specks of other people in the distance. I was in a state of panic and began to frantically throw myself towards the shore. Even though it slowed me down, I kept my head lifted awkwardly, both in a continued effort to call for help and to avoid looking at whatever presence might be right below me. I could have been underwater for any longer than a minute, but it looked like I was a whole football field away from where I started. I eventually gave up on attempting to call out. It was too far for them to hear, and I could barely make a sound between my gasps for air. So I plunged my face back down into the water to speed my retreat. As I did, I foolishly let my own curiosity take a hold of me and kept my eyes held wide open, glancing back to where she was. Right out of view, barely visible through the vile cloud above, I saw her, upright, floating in the water, suspended by a black cord that disappeared in complete darkness. Her face was once again cold and empty as she motionlessly watched me from below. The sight only terrified me further. I forced myself to look away and commanded every fiber of my body to focus on pulling me forward. I needed to get away, and I yearned for nothing more than the sanctuary of solid ground beneath my feet. I don't know how long it took me to return to shore, but in my memory it stretched for miles. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. I only then realized how agonizingly slow you move in water, even at a full sprint in the water. You move hardly faster than a person casually walking at a brisk pace. The entire time my mind filled with dread, knowing something impossibly faster than myself could be following below, something I would be defenseless against if it did decide to attack. Thankfully, that never happened. As I finally did draw close enough to hear the voices of other real breathing people, I could feel my body was already giving out, and I struggled to lift my arms out of water to take each and every stroke. My muscles flared with sharp pain, and I was violently gasping for air to fuel my panicked escape. When the water did become shallow enough to stand in, I dropped my legs down and slammed my feet into the loose ground and began to run. I ignored everything else as I single-mindedly thought of nothing but to escape the clutch of the lake. In one final push, I clumsily stumbled out of the water and came crashing down on the sand. It wasn't enough, and fear still kept me going. I started to crawl. I picked myself up and threw my body further and further away from that horrid lake until I finally slammed into the hard gravel where the soft beach ended and the trail began. I couldn't even move at this point. I had nothing left in me, and I just gasped for air as I could only listen to the deafening sound of my racing heartbeat. I felt a reach out and hand grab my shoulder, and I screamed in horror, cowering ready to face death itself. I looked up and saw one of the counselors looking at me with a look of concern. I slowly began to return to reality as tears streamed down my face. I struggled to form words, but could only manage to sputter a mess of garbled syllables. The man knelt down and tried to talk to me with his questions and words of comfort falling upon deaf ears. I struggled to even breathe. Every sense I had was both dialed up to such an extreme sensitivity, and yet I was unable to process anything around. When I finally did gain enough sense to speak, I could only think to blurt one stuttered phrase. In the lake. There's something in the lake. I shouted as I stumbled to my feet and pointed back to the water. Salty tears were forming rivers down my face, and a blob of snot hung from one of my nostrils. I choked and sobbed, trying to regain a semblance of composure, as terror still held a tight grip upon me. I parted my lips again to speak again, and looked to the counselor for reassurance when I was frozen by their stunned look of confusion. I glanced around and only saw more of the same. Their expressions communicated a complete lack of understanding from my statement. My brain rattled trying to form the right words to say when I realized how manic I must have looked. Who in their right mind would believe anything I had to say? That the lake? I whispered. All of the fear in me had evaporated and was being gradually filled by shame and embarrassment. I sat down and began to cry once again. I just curled up into a little ball on the ground trying to make myself smaller, in hopes that I would shrink down into nothing and disappear. I wanted to cover myself with a towel. I wanted to go back to get back to my cabin and change. I wanted to go home. I could feel the kids all watching me trying to figure out what to make of the scene. I looked up and met eyes with Amy. She had the same stupefied look of concern the rest of the kids and counselors did. She was as befuddled as everyone else. But then I saw her face shift. Both of ours did as we had the same realization. WH, where's Jack? I asked. The rest of the evening was a blur. I remember a lot of calls being made. I remember the counselors running about in a frenzy. I remember officers pulling up in their dust-covered cars. We were made to stay at the campgrounds. They asked me a lot of questions, but gave up when they realized I had little to say of use. I told them about our little dare, and that I didn't see him once I started swimming. I didn't say a word about the girl I had seen in the lake. When asked about why I came back all terrified, I just said the big open lake scared me and that was all. Our parents were called, and they were going to pick us up as soon as they could. For the rest of the evening, I stayed in my bunk. The rest of the kids left me alone. They could tell something was eating me up inside, and most likely assumed I was worried about Jack. I got the occasional word of sympathy, but mostly people asked me if I was doing all right. Whenever they asked, I always said the same thing. I'm okay. I was okay. I was alive and back on dry land. I didn't know if Jack was. That night, I wandered out of my cabin. With all the counselors out looking for Jack, they weren't keeping a tight watch on us. I simply got up and walked outside. I wasn't getting any sleep anyway. I went up the hill to the bathrooms and came to the top looking over all the cabins. I sat down on the ground and looked up at the night sky. It was so beautiful, without the lights of humanity blotting it out. The twinkling aurora of the stars were plainly in view, and the moon hung amongst them like a dim spotlight. After a while, I saw Amy come up the path, and without a word sit herself down next to me. I looked at her and could tell she couldn't sleep either. I tried to give her a smile, but I couldn't manage it. I saw in her face something that I've been desperately longing for, a hint of understanding. She didn't know what I saw down in that lake, but she knew something down there had shaken me to my core. I had seen something so deeply terrifying that I will never forget. She looked back up at the sky, and then back to me. "It's pretty, isn't it?" she said. She had a feigned look of appreciation upon her. "Yeah, it is." I replied. We sat together for a while, wordlessly sharing a view of that grand cosmic canvas of colors and lights. Then, when she was ready to leave, she leaned over to me, reaching her arms around me, and gripped me in a tight hug. At first, I was stunned and didn't know what to do, until I felt her tears soaking into my shirt. I put my arms around her and hugged her back. After that, she got up, said goodbye, and I saw as she walked back down to her cabin. I grimaced as she did. Of the many emotions washed over me in that moment, the strongest one of them all was guilt. I felt guilt over how happy that hug made me feel. I looked back to the stars one last time and thought of Jack. Then I went back down the hill and tried to find some semblance of rest of night. I never spoke to Amy again after that, and they never found Jack. I went home with my parents that morning, slipping away without a word. I still swim on occasions, never on the open water, of course, always in a pool and never alone. After all, I am still good at it, and it keeps me in shape. However, whenever I go, I always have a little ritual I have to do first. Without exceptions, I go up to the edge of the pool, dive into the water feet first, exhale all the air in me, and let myself sink right to the bottom. Then I sit at the bottom of the pool and take a moment to think. Not for long, only a couple seconds or so. It's a calming experience, you see. Only the sound of churning water in your ears, and a chance to be sure there's nothing else down there with you. Story 8. My colleague was working the night shift in IKEA. I'm not sure I believe what he saw, but maybe I should. My shift is next. I'm a security guard at our town's IKEA. My friend and colleague had worked the routes for years. He knew every aisle, every creak, every hum of our massive store after hours. The hush of the empty IKEA was almost comforting. like the place was asleep, dreaming in the dark. Until that night, as his boots echoed across the linoleum as he rounded the corner into the grocery section in the quiet of the store. Something caught his eye. He stopped. One aisle, the dairy aisle, was fully lit. Cold fluorescent light pooled over neat rows of milk jugs and yogurt tubs, shining like a stage. Some unopened milk jugs strewn about on the floor. He was sure that if something like this happened, he'd hear it. He was there moments ago. The lighting was not possible. The system didn't have a way to power only one aisle. Either the entire section lit up, or none of it did. He swept his flashlight along the edge of the glow, the beam swallowed by the stark luminescence ahead. And then, a ghastly sound. A low, rhythmic gulping and a wet, hungry sucking noise coming from high up near the top shelf. Plastic straining, wheezing. He felt his scalp and skin crawl all over. He lifted the flashlight and shone it into the light. She was there, clinging to the upper racks, folded in on herself like a spider. Her frame was slender and wrong, too long in the limbs, torso heaving as she was draining. A dark had framed her head, but he could see the shape of her face. Pale alabaster skin, delicate features too perfectly smooth, a small pointed chin. Her mouth was locked to a plastic milk jug. Her black claws sunk deep into the collapsing sides. Her hands and feet were pure void, matte black, as if they absorbed the light. Her hands lithe and strong, flexing in time with each horrific swallow. He watched, rooted to the spot, as the jug imploded with squealing death rattle, caving in tighter and tighter, like it was begging for release. Not a single drop escaped. The milk drained into her, as though the jug's anguish was at an end, but not soon enough. Then she lowered it, drained flat, her claws still piercing the plastic, and she looked at him. Her eyes were the worst part. Black sclera, two endless pits, staring through him. At the center, green pupils glowed with a cold, unblinking hunger. He felt his pulse hammer in his throat. He tried to step back, and without so much as a ripple or puff of air, she was gone. No blur, no flicker, no sound. One moment she was there, the next, she simply wasn't. His flashlight sputtered out. The aisle plunged into darkness. He stood there, heart beating so hard it was practically in his throat. A moment later, the beam returned. The dairy section was dark again, lightless, undisturbed. Every jug lined up in perfect order. No mess, oily jugs gleaming under the cold afterglow, except the one she'd taken. It was nowhere. No drips, no crushed plastic, nothing. His mind tried to insist he was overtired, that he was hallucinating. But he knew, with a clear, perfect certainty sharper than any fear. Because sometime later on his shift, he found that same drained jug in the correct recycling bin. He was wide awake. He was certain she was real. I somehow still doubt it. I still want to believe he imagined it. But maybe I shouldn't. Story 9. What's going on in my head? The castle hovered somewhere ahead, not quite near, not quite distant, just suspended. The sky above was a sallow gray, drooping like a sigh that had forgotten why it was ever drawn in. His gaze dissolved into the vast pale ceiling, where two clouds wandered alone, their paths slow and reluctant, like they were dragging memories behind them. They moved without wind, without will. Only the idea of movement remained. The gates had fallen flat against the ground, collapsed like thoughts too heavy to hold up. From them, figures in black robes spilled out, not walking, but appearing all at once, like smoke given form. They drifted into the woods around the castle, their presence soft, almost mistaken for silence. Above, the sky hung still, no breath, no pulse, just a quiet choke, like time had stopped to weep but couldn't remember the reason. Ravens circled low, pecking half-heartedly at the fleshless remnants of something once alive. Shadows rippled over the clouds, hues of gray darker than grief. They felt sent, perhaps by a god or the memory of one, someone immense, someone long gone, someone who had given up. By the lake, what used to be a lake. She paused. It twitched once, then reversed, water folding back in the sky like a reel unwinding. She reached down, brushing the surface, but there was nothing. The lake had dried in the war, the last war, or the one before that. Still, she kept walking. The corpses revealed themselves, shapes sunken into the earth, soaked in forgotten years. For a moment, she thought of robbing them. Her fingers met flesh, but dissolved on contact. Beneath, a bone. Then, not even that, just a pale stone, cold in her palm. She turned to the trees, asking with her eyes what sin she had committed. No reply. When she exhaled, deeper this time, she realized she hadn't moved at all. She was still at the lake. She had never left. Maybe love will reach you one day. The voice was distant, or maybe inside her, weary and translucent. It didn't matter. She dismissed it, unsure whether it was from memory or something worse. Drink. Wind crashed in, sudden and absolute. The lake swelled again, brimming like a lung filled too fast. She drank. It tasted of ink. Bitter, thick. She spat, startled, but it was only water, or so she thought. When she opened her eyes, the lake was dry again. The liquid at her feet turned scarlet. Not ink, blood. Hers. Hands trembling, she reached for her dagger. The need was sharp, familiar. She wanted to end it. She almost did. Her eyes flicked open again. Don't. Angels shouldn't stain their wings. Fall from grace. The castle was still far. Maybe it had never moved. Maybe she hadn't either. Still, she had to reach it. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it meant nothing at all. But she couldn't stay. Not in this moment that refused to pass. Her feet were bare. The ground clung to her, muddy, warm, unclean. Somehow, she found comfort in it. Then, a hedgehog appeared, or tried to. She stepped forward, and pain bloomed. No hedgehog, just broken steel. The earth had turned on her. She walked anyway. The gates weren't far now. Maybe she never was. The bird began to see. Slowly, as if awakening from centuries of silence, they gathered on the castle gates. Their songs grew harsher with every passing second, twisting from melody to something more like screaming. Shrieks caught between metal and throat. It wasn't beautiful anymore. It was collapse. The birds seemed to be choking on their own voices. And then they changed. Owls now, but not the quiet, wise kind. These looked wrong. Elongated, heavy with judgment. Their eyes, hollow and aching, didn't just watch. They declared. They were omens stitched into feathers. Now show us what hides behind the mask. The voice was not quite spoken. It floated, brittle and echoing, a demand made by the wind, or by the owls, or by something older. She finally reached the gates. She looked at the birds, but there was no fear, only recognition. She placed her hand against the cold steel. It softened beneath her palm. Metal turned to aged wood, grainy and warm. The castle had vanished. Before her stood a crooked old house. She opened the door. Inside, a small girl, weeping quietly in the corner. She didn't speak to her. She didn't need to. Behind the child, the bodies lay still. Fresh, blood pooling into the splinters of the floorboards. The air was thick with it. Death that hadn't learned to settle. She stepped over the threshold, and the wooden house melted behind her. She was inside the castle again. Welcome home, my beloved nephew. The voice was velvet, lined with rot, familiar in the way a dream can be. Aunt, you haven't aged at all. Do you still eat them? Only the special ones are delivered here, she cooed. You darling, I wouldn't dare touch you. You're far too beautiful. You say that, but you're already looking at me like you've chosen where to bite. Oh, don't be so dramatic. Just one taste. I must stay young. Then the knife was inside her. The pain followed instantly, a soft gasp turning to a silent scream. A piece of her belly slipped to the floor, like it no longer belonged to her. Her aunt crouched like an animal, no grace, no shame, and began to chew, face smeared in red. Not hungrily, but as if it were necessary. As if youth itself required sacrifice. Hey, are you okay? You're bleeding. The voice snapped her back. Her eyes opened. Dizziness peeled away like old wallpaper. She was standing upright, alone. The dagger was in her stomach, really there. She hadn't noticed. Until now. She gritted her teeth, found some fading piece of will, and pulled it out. A delicate, broken cry escaped her lips. "You're not from here, are you?" She didn't answer. She just kept walking forward, past the pain, past the stranger, her mind still trapped behind some locked, burning door she no longer knew how to open. Ha ha! This flesh is to die for. Truly, keeps you young and full of breath. The apostles were feasting well all this time. The tavern breathed like an old lung, damp and wheezing. She stepped inside, unnoticed, her presence absorbed by the shadows. No one looked up, as if she wasn't there at all. She drifted to the farthest corner, where the candlelight barely reached. The table was half rotted, swollen from dried blood. The chair groaned beneath her, like it remembered pain. The bartender didn't look up. He leaned against the bar, like a man bored of existence. His greasy black hair hung limp around the long fox ears curled backward like wilted petals. His shirt was torn, half-eaten, like something had taken a bite from him, and he never bothered to mend it. He was busy carving at his fingernails. No, removing them. Entire nails, one by one, flicked into the air. A few landed in the drinks of the old men laughing in the back. They didn't notice, or didn't care. They looked half-mad, wearing smiles too wide for their faces. The light inside the tavern flickered like memory, dim lanterns swaying from rusted chains, barely holding back the dark. Shadows whispered behind them, as if they were waiting their turn. Another man approached her table. He had fox ears too, but no eyes, just smooth, pale skin where sight should be. He placed a glass in front of her without a word, his hand shaking slightly as he set it down. Then he turned and vanished into the haze, like a thought she forgot mid-sentence. She stared at the glass. It shimmered faintly in the candlelight, a colorless liquid inside, or maybe no liquid at all. Her hand hovered near it, hesitant, detached. All around her, the world moved wrong. Dice clattered beside her. Laughter rose, sharp and brittle. Then, a sudden thud. One of the men collapsed forward, his face still twisted in amusement. No scream, no shock. The bartender walked over slowly, grabbed the corpse by the collar, and dragged it across the floor, leaving a streak like spilled ink. He tossed it into the river just outside the window. A few minutes later, smoke began curling up from the grill near the tavern's back wall. She didn't flinch. She was too thirsty. The glass still appeared full, still clear, empty. She brought it to her lips and took the smallest sip. It tasted like nothing, like absence. She lowered the glass and found it empty. Had it always been? Her gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, the sky was bruising, dusk bleeding into night. An owl landed on the ledge, inches from her. Their eyes met. The owl looked exhausted. Like her. Then, without warning, a larger owl descended, slow and silent, and devoured the smaller one whole. A single gulp, like erasing a sentence. The girl recoiled slightly, her stomach tightening. She looked toward the tree nearby. The little owl had always sat there. Every time. She blinked. "You should try this," the bartender said, setting a plate in front of her. "I don't eat fingers," she replied, voice dry. He tilted his head, ears twitching slightly. His hands rested on the edge of the table, long fingers tapping slowly. "But you don't look old. Are you lying?" "I'm still human." He grinned, exposing yellowing teeth. "They all say that. Then they feast on other people's dreams." He left the plate behind. It twitched once, then went still. Outside, the sky collapsed into dusk. The tavern dimmed. She stood slowly, legs stiff like they had forgotten how to move. Her eyes lingered on the window once more, then turned away. It was time to go. Go back. If you don't, they'll erase you from this world. It's too dark. I can't see his face. I think he's smiling. She wouldn't drink. Not at first. They made her. Should have buried her with the others. God isn't watching anymore. The trees moved like something breathing through its ribs. Windless, but swaying. The night folded over itself. Folded again. She was walking, maybe, or standing still. Even the sound of her steps felt borrowed. A tremble underfoot, not loud, more like a memory of an earthquake. The moss peeled back, roots curled in. The forest shivered in a way no forest should. "A fallen," came the whisper, drawn out and hollow. "Let's see if your flesh remembers being sacred." She looked toward the voice, but the trees melted sideways, making space for something long and wet and wrong. A serpent, but not quite. Its scales reflected things she hadn't lived. Its eyes were wide with things she didn't want to remember. It circled her, but not around her body. It circled around her mind. The forest is not your friend. Apostles fed us before they rotted. We swallowed dreams whole. She raised a hand, instinct of prayer. It wasn't clear. A soft light gathered in her palm. Not sunlight, not fire. Something colder, like the afterimage of hope. "I deny your existence," she said, though her voice came from somewhere behind her. "You don't get to deny what you dreamed," the snake said. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe that voice was hers, coming from the snake's throat, the white glow pulse ones. Around her, the snakes revealed themselves, tall as trees, thin as memory, writhing in silent judgment. But were they ever really hidden, or had she just refused to see them? One lunge. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Its face met her palm and shattered, but the shattering made no sound. Just a ripple of glass breaking somewhere underwater. Bone fell, or rain. The others hissed, but it sounded like sobbing now, or laughter. They pulled away, dissolving into the tree trunks, slinking back into whatever they had been before shapes were named. Her hand was empty. Had it glowed? She couldn't tell anymore. It felt cold. It felt burned. It felt like it had never been hers. And now, just ahead, the forest ended. A river waited, black and slow, mirroring nothing. She walked the winding road, her feet silent on the ground. A small serpent slithered by her ankle, flicked its tongue, and kept going. It left no mark in the dirt. When she looked back, there were no tracks. She watched the village across the water. The lights in the inn flickered warmly, like candles remembering who they used to be. Smoke curled from its crooked chimney. It looked safe, but she had learned by now. So often, safety only dressed itself in old familiar skins. The inn's door creaked open without anyone touching it. One night as always, "Sylvie?" She didn't answer. Her mouth felt stitched shut. The voice had called her name like it owned it. At last, faint shades of light broke through the gray expanse of cloud above. They weren't strong, just gentle traces of warmth, but they cast soft reflections across her face, flickering like memories too distant to reach. And then, "It feels good," Sylvie murmured. Her voice was quiet, almost unsure. "I've been here all along, haven't I? Trapped in something that feels like endless pain, but it's okay. I'll make it through. I have to. It's always been your fault," a voice whispered from nowhere. "You should never have been born into this world." "I know," she said without anger, "but I've been walking this path for so long now. I know I haven't done everything right. I know I left behind, but I didn't mean to. I wanted to be like her, like my mother, before she took her last breath." "So you're lost," the voice replied. "Adrift?" "No, not lost," she whispered. "Just hollow. I haven't felt anything in a long time, and maybe I never will again. But it's too late for tears now. Too late for memories. I have to stop them, the ones who destroyed everything she cared about." "You're weak," the voice said coldly. "Your mind is splintered. What do you have? A dagger and a dream? What good will that do you?" Sylvie looked down at her hands. They were trembling, but not from fear. "It's not about what I hold," she said. "It's about what I choose, what I carry, what I still believe in. That's why I have to continue what she started. That's why I can't give up. She loved me more than the world ever could, and the world took her away." She stepped into the lake. The water was cold, still, quiet. It embraced her feet, like glass remembering rain. "I don't need to cry anymore," she said softly. "I've rejected that part of me. That's not what you would have wanted." "You're living inside an illusion," the voice said. The world doesn't change. The past is the past and always will be. Maybe, Sylvie replied, but I don't need the world to change. I only need to move forward. Even if my mind breaks, even if the illusions kill me, I'll keep going. I'll stand again. Story 10. 11 miles. I never thought I would actually find it. Every night, I drove through the forest on my way home, and every night, I watched the trees for anything unusual, anything abnormal. I saw the trees before I saw the road. They hung low, as if their leaves were heavier than expected. They looked wrong, as if faintly lit up by the setting sun. Even though it was nighttime, I pulled to a stop at the opening to the road, chills sinking into the deepest parts of my body. It was real, a tree-lined road that led what I knew was just someone's farm. I didn't hesitate. Why would I? I just filled up on gas. I wasn't a slight bit tired, and this was my one chance to have the thing that I wanted most. I always planned to do this in my Equinox, but my van would have to work. She'd been there for me my entire life, and we would have to go into this together. She was a large, heavy, high-top roof conversion van, built in the late 80s. She had blue and white stripe paint, a frankly pathetic sound system, and 4 glass headlights that shone into the gloom. I nervously reached up, patting the dashboard. "We got this," I whispered softly, glancing up to my dash cam. Unsurprisingly, the device had already turned itself off. Figures. I knew my phone would be a no help, so I turned it off and placed it in the box between the seats where the PlayStation rested. I didn't want the radio interfering either, so I disconnected the faceplate and set it in the cup holder. I let go of the brake, and a tired old V8 rumbled as I turned down onto the 11-mile road. Mile 1 was easy. As the white dial on the odometer hit 5, I realized that it was getting cold. Well, colder than usual. The AC in my van was expensive to keep working, but somehow it did. For now, though, I shut it off. The sky above the trees was crystal clear, even though the weather had been calling for storms on my way home. It was beautiful. There were more stars than I had ever seen before in my life, which were distracting enough that I almost didn't think to turn the heat on. I set the van to heat, since only on heat would coolant flow to the rear unit. By the time I reached the 2nd mile, the van had started to warm back up again. The odometer ticked over to 1, and as I entered the 3rd mile, just as expected, I began to see figures amongst the trees. Shadows vaguely shaped like humans, but not quite right. The neck might be too long, or the head too wide. I tried not to look at them, and as I reached mile 4, I tried not to listen to them either. The figures filled the space between the trees now, clogging up the forest, whispering faintly to me in the very back of my mind. The road was getting worse now. Sharp bend after sharp bend, potholes and fallen logs. Nothing that stopped me completely, but navigating an old van around these things wasn't exactly easy. Still, it helped having a truck-like frame, since certain things I could simply drive right over. Suddenly, to the left, the tree lane abruptly ended, revealing a huge lake beside the road. The moon hung heavy over the never-ending waters, shining so brightly that my headlights didn't seem to be doing much of anything. It was what moonlight would look like if it was as bright as the sunlight. I only looked at the moon for a moment, and even then, when I looked back to the road, my van had already started to veer towards the side of the road. I gripped the wheel tightly, and as the odometer approached another 9, I saw the trees rushing back up to greet me on the left. It was like driving into a tunnel. One moment, I could see everything as if it was midday in August, and the next, nothing. I shuddered slightly, taking solace that my pilgrimage was halfway over. My van had 6 lights up front, 2 high beams, 2 low beams, and 2 cheap little LED lights on the grill, aimed toward the sides of the road, so I could spot deer more effectively. I knew my wiring was good, but I forgot what else mile 6 entailed, and I flinched slightly as a radio beeped. I'd turned it down all the way, but I could still faintly hear the calm voice as it spoke. I grit my teeth, as I knew what it meant. It would speak of my fears, the horrors that haunted me, and ironically, that which set me on this trip in the first place. So I did what most others did on mile 6. I sped up, I moved the shifter, taking away third gear from transmission, since the engine roared louder in second. Driving the van actually helped a little here, because it took so much effort to keep the damn thing on the road. I barely registered anything the voice had been saying. Thankfully, the voice began fading, and I hazarded a glance at the odometer to see that I was nearly to the 7th mile. The only issue was on mile 7, the radio was simply exchanged for screams outside. The shadows were back, but these ones screamed and cried with pain and agony. The further along I got, the louder the screams sounded, until one of them screeched directly into my ear, as if it was behind me. I flinched, but I stubbornly glared out the windshield, trying desperately not to pay any attention to the faint, haggard wheezing behind me, breaths from something that hadn't needed lungs in a very long time. As I hit the 8th mile, the breathing behind me went silent. I stepped on the brakes, shivering as the road twisted and turned back on itself. I downshifted again, locking the transmission into first gear, partially for the nose, partially for power, and partially to generate as much heat as possible. The cold was unbearable here, and both the front and rear heaters were struggling to warm the air at all. My headlights grew even more unreliable, flickering and giving out at random. Usually I would have at least some lights, but sometimes they would all go out and I'd have to slow down until they came back. The screaming was all outside the van now. I could hear fingers dragging on the paint on the glass, but I ignored all of it. There was no turning back now. As the odometer slowly rolled, halfway between 9 and 0, the engine cut out, the headlights flickered off, the cabin fans died, and the resulting absence of sound was flooded with the screams and cries from outside. I closed my eyes tightly. I could hear them, pulling on the door handles, banging on the glass, shaking the vehicle slightly. I turned the key back, shifted into neutral, and cranked the engine over. It turned weakly, as if the cold was already sapping every last shred of strength from the battery. I began to shake as I turned the key again, my jaw clenched tightly, and right as the engine seemed to make its last revolution, 1, then 2, then 4 of the cylinders fired, spinning the engine over just enough for the rest to wake up and bring it to life. I dragged the shifter back to 1 as I floored the gas pedal, and as soon as the transmission shifted, the van lurched forwards. For perhaps the first time ever, I was thankful that I lacked the necessary engine power to spin the wheels. I opened my eyes again after a moment, resuming my mission of steering even as I raced for the 10th mile. The road turned right, left, right again, right even more impossibly, as if I was driving through an area I had just been, until it suddenly opened up. Well, it didn't open up, but the road straightened. I couldn't hear the voices anymore, and while the tree lanes were still filled with ghostly figures, they didn't whisper or scream. They simply watched. They knew what was ahead, and they knew I likely wouldn't suit of it. But I didn't care. The road straightened out again, but as I pushed the gas pedal somewhat, the engine died a second time. The lights went out, along with everything else in the vehicle. Even the LED on the old trailer brake controller went out. The forest looked like a tunnel now, with no light except for a faint redness in the distance. The van kept rolling forwards, moving on its own now, dragged toward the redness. I slid the lever to AC, for some reason, as if that would help, but that was all I had the time to do before I had to close my eyes tightly, cover them with both hands, and brace myself. The 11th mile of the road was hell. From every possible angle, unfathomable noise shook me to bone, my muscles all tensing as a response. The freezing cold was replaced with moments by excessive heat. For a few moments it felt like the time my AC conked out in the middle of August, but I was soon wishing it was that cold as it increased. I could only imagine what was happening to my van outside. The headlights melting and pouring molten glass down over the bumper, the paint stripping, the fiberglass roof lighting on fire. I could feel my skin burning, melting off my bones, my entire body burn away just like my van, as if we had tumbled into the depths of hell and plunged into the deepest magma of the Earth's very core. And then it was over. I heard the engine ignite, then hum with power. I heard the AC compressor kick on, and I felt cool air tumble from the vents. The screaming and noise was already fading into my memories, and I shuddered as I slowly took hold of the steering wheel again. It was almost over. I gently pressed the brake pedal, and the van rolled to a stop. I took a moment to breathe, still shivering a little as memories of the ordeal passed through me. I touched one of my arms with the other, just to make sure I was still real. For now, I almost glanced at the rearview mirror, but I didn't. I let go of the brake, looked ahead, and started driving. After less than a mile, maybe a kilometer or so, I came around a curve and to a dead end. The road simply stopped. Trees beyond it, trees to either side. I had done it. I closed my eyes and I laid back in my seat. I thought about what I had wanted so very badly, to put myself through this ordeal. Something I knew science or witchcraft could never give me. Something I couldn't afford to fake like so many others. I didn't realize I had started to fall asleep until I woke with a start, jolting enough to rock the van slightly. I was back where I started, back at the entrance to the 11-mile road. Behind me was the town I'd gotten gas in, and ahead of me was home. I looked down, looked at the fur that now lined my arms. I leaned forwards in my seat, enough to let my leathery wings open and curl around me from either side. Now smiling, I finally looked up in the mirror, admiring my horns and the razor-sharp teeth lining my smile. I was everything I had ever wanted to be.